This is Stacey Abrams, the former gubernatorial candidate from Georgia. She was given the opportunity to give the Democratic response to the State of the Union address. Let's see what she had to say.
Let's be clear. Voter suppression is real.
That's all you really need to see from that. Stacey Abrams claims that she lost Georgia's governor's race because of straight-up voter suppression.
Was the election in Georgia statewide a free and fair election?
It was not a free and fair election.
And with that, Abrams founded a voting rights advocacy group called Fair Fight Action and has filed a federal lawsuit claiming that the Secretary of State and State Election Board grossly mismanaged an election that deprived Georgia citizens, and particularly citizens of color, of their fundamental right to vote. But then goes on to state that the 2018 election drew historic voter registration and turnout, particularly among voters of color. Let me get this straight. Because of voter suppression, people of color were denied their right to vote. But at the same time, there was historic registration and turnout among people of color. Okay. In 2017, for example, the Secretary of State unconstitutionally purged the rolls of nearly 10% of Georgia's registered voters. These voters were disenfranchised under Georgia's use it or lose it law, merely because they had not recently exercised their right to vote. This was the main narrative of Stacey Abrams in the press during the election, that her opponent, Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp, was trying to steal the election by improperly purging people from the voter rolls. Except for one thing. It wasn't improper because he was legally required to do it. That's right. State law requires that the voter rolls be maintained and updated every 2 years to ensure their integrity. I should also point out that the law was passed in 1997 when Democrats controlled the state legislature and the governor's office. The law has been on the books for over 2 decades, but it's only an issue when a black Democrat runs for governor in a red state. Funny how that works.
We had thousands of Georgians who were purged from the rolls wrongly.
So how does this so-called purge work? Basically, if you don't vote during a 3-year period, you get a postcard asking to confirm that you still live at that address and that you still want to be a registered voter. And if you don't send back the form, you remain on the voter rolls as inactive, but you can still vote like normal. Then, if you don't vote for another 2 general elections, that's when you get removed from the rolls. Basically, if someone doesn't vote in a general election for 7 consecutive years, they are removed from the registered voter list. Now, if you're removed from the list, you'll never believe what you have to do to start voting again. They make you re-register.
When I think about Georgia and the voter suppression that we saw in the most recent election between Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp, like the idea of Brian Kemp stripping 300,000 names from the voter polls, that's nothing new. That is literally straight out of Mississippi voting rights oppression.
Oh yeah, being removed from a voter list for not voting for several years, it's exactly like Jim Crow era Mississippi. By the way, between 2010 and 2017, more white voters were removed from the list than all other race categories combined. The lawsuit also claims that under the exact match policy, inconsequential typographical mismatches were used to deny Georgians their right to vote. For example, if the name on a voter registration didn't exactly match up with DMV or Social Security records, the registration was marked as pending. Information didn't match? Wow, that's so inconsequential. These mismatches were often caused by technical limitations on government computer systems or typographical errors by government employees. But these mismatches are also often caused by the actual voter incorrectly filling out the registration, and in some cases, workers from voter registration drives. In 2014, the New Georgia Project, a voter registration initiative founded by Stacey Abrams, had gathered and submitted 85,000 voter registrations. And the state found that nearly 40,000 of those registrations contained problems. Many of the voters registering were already registered. Others were dead. Some were convicted felons ineligible to vote, and some contained addresses with out-of-state zip codes. Again, all inconsequential. In October 2018, the Associated Press published a story that 53,000 registrations were in pending status, many of them due to the exact match policy. So if you're one of the 53,000 in pending status, does that mean you can't vote?
The 53,000 that we know about do have the ability to go and cast a ballot.
You heard it straight from Abrams. If your registration is in pending status, you can still vote. But she claims in the lawsuit that the exact match policy denied people their right to vote. Ugh, I'm so confused. Georgia elections officials deployed a known strategy of voter suppression, closing and relocating polling places. Despite projections of record turnout, elections officials closed or moved approximately 305 locations. Not exactly. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, between 2012 and 2018, 214 voting precincts have been closed, which is a decrease of 8%. But that's because in the 2018 general election, early voting and absentee ballots made up 59% of all ballots cast. And with less election day demand, that means you don't need as many polling stations. Besides, if you feel like a voting precinct is too far to travel to, you can get an absentee ballot and mail it in.
It was not fair to the thousands who were forced to wait in long lines because they were in polling places that were under-resourced. Or worse, they had no polling places to go to because more than 300 had been closed.
I'm sorry, what?
They had no polling places to go to.
They had no polling places to go to? What does that even mean? Wow, this woman is full of it. Just remember to keep all of this in mind when she runs for the Georgia Senate in 2020. And if she does, Lord help us all. Thanks for watching, sharing, and hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out the links and sources in the description, and check out these videos that you may have missed. As always, I hope to see you next time.